little bit, Peter, about the history of plastic surgery. I read most of the book before the show. Very well written, extremely clearly articulated concepts. A lot of times when doctors talk for the lay public, they way overcomplicate things, use big words, try to confuse them. This is very clearly written. I enjoyed it. But I was fascinated to see that plastic surgery was being attempted by the Egyptians 5,000 years ago. So start with that and tell us a little bit about the history.
Let me just start for a moment about the style in which the book, you very nicely complimented us, that was written. I can't take all the credit for it, far from it, because we had two lay writers who helped with putting together the text in a way that was readily understandable to non-physicians. And what I did, I ended up editing all that, and then at the end of most chapters, if not all, I put something what's called editor's viewpoint. Because let's say in the facelift chapter, there will be 12 different ways to do facelifts described in some detail.
Literally, there's 12 ways to skin a cat, no pun intended.
As there is. So what I try to do is synthesize and just kind of clarify the issues a little bit by a half a page editor's viewpoint segment. But anyway, and I tried very hard to write that in terms that lay readers would understand it well. History of plastic surgery is fascinating. And yes, and it started thousands of years ago. And interestingly enough, it somehow always revolved around reconstruction of the nose. And this had to do with the fact that in battlefield, noses were lost. But also in many ancient cultures, infidelity was punished by amputating the person's nose.
Well, clearly, I've been a faithful husband.
You've been a faithful husband, absolutely, absolutely. And yes, thousands of years ago already, there were two major, almost competing ways to reconstruct, to rebuild the nose. And this went on for centuries. And it wasn't done necessarily by physicians. This was done by artisans. And there was even the word plastic surgery came from plasticos, because same artisans who are making pots, in ceramic pots, were also doing surgery. And so this is part of the genesis of the term, which is interesting. Later on, there was a major attempt around the beginning of the Second World War to change the name to constructive surgery, because a lot of people, plastic surgery, do we use plastic? What is plastic about? But that's how the word came about. But getting back to nasal reconstruction and how the procedures evolved, one way to reconstruct the nose, which eventually for the first time was written up by Dr. Tagliacozzi, who was a professor of anatomy and surgery in Padua University in Italy, was to use the thin skin of the inner arm and make a little flap, a little opening there, and implant that into the defect that was from absence of the nose. You have to freshen up the edges, of course, and then have the skin from there grow into the nasal skin, so you can cut it off from the arm and mold it into a nose.
Let it